Thanks everybody for being on time. I'm going to hand this over to Nick really quickly because he's got some great content. The way he thinks, the way he writes, the organization that he's a founder and creator of and works every day in aligns very well. He's new to Petrons and kind of new to the Petra universe, but I think he's going to be a great addition. Flipping through the book over the last week or so, there's lots of little pieces that are like, yep, totally, we got to go do that. Totally, we got to go do that. And then, Nick, you weren't here this morning, I don't think, but Vern talked a lot about efficiency and the creation of efficiency over the next years. And then, obviously that's a big cornerstone of what you have in your book. So we had the screen up earlier. I mean, Nick is a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, columnist. He knows what he's talking about. He's an expert in his field. I'm going to turn it over to you just to jump right into the content because I don't want these people to miss anything whatsoever. So, Nick, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. And Vern's a dear friend, and I know we've worked together over the years, and he's quite efficient himself. So it's nice to meet everyone. And for the next 45 or so minutes, I want to be talking about operational efficiency and how work can be easier, less stressful, with more output. And so I want this to be interactive. I put together slides, but if there's anything that you have questions about, there'll be some Q&A at the end, but feel free to type it in the chat and I can stop and adjust accordingly, so you're not sitting there for 30 minutes with a burning question. A lot of people want to know how I got into this, and as Andy pointed out, I just wrote a book. It came out 2 months ago called Come Up for Air. It's done quite well, and it's really meant to be the employee manual that you never got. When you think about when you get hired at a company, you get a manual that talks about vacation days and health insurance and maybe the core values if you're lucky, but you don't really get a manual on how you actually work at that company or that team. And there's tools that we all use now, like beyond email, beyond Gmail and Outlook. There's Slack, there's Microsoft Teams, there's Asana, there's Coda, there's Notion. There's a whole bunch of tools that have come out in the last 10 years, yet there's no training when you get hired in terms of how to best use these. And it's not just how to use these, but when to use these. And I run a company called Leverage that does operational efficiency training and consulting. And what we have found is you can literally give back people over a full day a week per person in a company by just aligning them on the best practices of not just how, but when to use these tools. And so that's the purpose of my book. If I were to rewind and kind of just give a little bit of a background about how I got here and how the book came about, I started my company in 2015. I was a high frequency trader in Wall Street for 8 years. And then I got into startups in the productivity space. And we grew very quickly. We grew to 7 figures in the first year. We were a freelancer marketplace, and we had about 150 people within the first year on the team. That usually impresses people, but when you kind of pull back the curtain, you look under the hood, we were a complete mess. We got way too far ahead of our skis, and we prematurely scaled. And one mistake, which I'm guessing everyone here would understand as a mistake, is for a 150 person team, our org chart was just 2 people. It was me, and I was the behind the scenes guy, and then I had a business partner that was the front facing guy. We had a ton of debt. We were losing a ton of money. So although we grew revenue and team, we weren't doing it in the right way. And one day we were having coffee together, my business partner and I, and he taps me on the shoulder and he tells me he's out. Not in 2 weeks or 2 days. He's literally out in 2 minutes. And I go white and I'm thinking to myself, holy crap, we're gonna go bankrupt. Like, not only were we losing a ton of money, but literally no one even knew who I was. We had about 500 clients and 150 team members, and maybe 5 people knew me. And I had to make a decision. Do I bankrupt the company, or do I try to, recorrect, renavigate the ship? And I decided to renavigate the ship because, one, I didn't think it was ethical for people to lose their credits that they had pre-purchased. And this, again, we were a freelancer marketplace. We're not doing what we were doing today. So we owed all these credits. But 2, I saw a path to turning things around. Now, in the forthcoming months after that tap on the shoulder, it was horrible. We lost like 40% of revenue in a 3-month period. I'm cashing out my 401k. My dad's making loans to the company to help us make payroll and taking second mortgages out on his house. I mean, it was really tough. But what it did do was it forced me to rethink how work was done and how we worked. And I started realizing and analyzing where are all the places that we are kind of failing right now. And with a 150 person team and 2 people, it can be a complete cluster. And I started working very late nights, but in a very quick, short time period, I started figuring out how to recorrect things. I started realizing that we were drowning in messages, that there was just nonstop notifications. Anyone here experienced nonstop notifications? It was hard to get any work done because it was like, by the time you start typing again, there's another Slack message or another email to deal with. So we were drowning in communication. Also, I realized I didn't know who was working on what. I couldn't just click a button and know that Andrew's working on this project. And I asked Aiden to do this and he's past due on it. That should have been a click away and it wasn't. And then lastly, I knew the importance of documenting processes and standard operating procedures. And had we not have already been doing that one, at least, we definitely would have gone bankrupt. So I started focusing on communication, planning, and resources. So CP and R were kind of the 3 buckets. And very quickly, things did start turning around. We started becoming closer and closer to profitability. People started reaching out to me, asking them to help. So I have worked with Vern. I've worked with Tony Robbins. Ethereum reached out to me to help them. Poopery the Poop Spray, financial advisor. So it's not just big companies, it's smaller companies too. By word of mouth, started reaching out, asking me to take a look at their systems and operations and see how we could help make it more efficient. And that wasn't the core business model of Leverage at the time. So I set up an LLC and just started on the side doing a bit of consulting while we were going kind of through this chaos. And I started realizing that the same exact things that were turning Leverage around were just as impactful to Vern or Tony or a poop spray company. Every single business, it didn't matter the size or the industry, needed to communicate with people internally with their team, externally with clients. They needed to plan. There's tasks. Every company's got tasks and projects. Work needs to get done. And lastly, everyone has intellectual property. You have SOPs, you have processes, how you onboard a new client, how you onboard a new team member, your core values, all of this is intellectual property that should be in the click of a button, 1 or 2 clicks away from you being able to find the answer. And so I started realizing the impact that this was making, and we decided to pivot Leverage from being the freelancer marketplace to what it is today, which is a operational efficiency training and consulting company. And I decided to write the book because ultimately my mission is to help save millions of hours of people's time. And at this point, we've worked with so many thousands of teams and have basically created a formula for exactly what you need for teams to be saving a day a week per team member. And so we wrote the book to get the message out and help as many people as possible. So that's my long-winded intro. And for the remainder of the time today, I would still encourage you to get the book, but I'm going to share with you the 3 biggest concepts from the book that I think can immediately help you save time. Sound good?
Perfect.
Okay. So I want to actually just kick it off with the opposite of what most speakers probably want. I want you to take out your phone and I want you to scan that QR code. And if you don't mind scanning it, it's going to ask you a very simple question. Where do you feel like you're wasting the most time? And I want to just kick this off and get a bit of a survey right now, because I might tailor the direction that this conversation goes based off of what you type in. Now, I've done this enough where I can probably predict what you're going to type, but let's see what you type.
I like bathroom breaks. Bathroom breaks made the list.
Well, yeah, diapers is the key to productivity. If everyone can just sit at their desk longer. Emails, meetings. All right. So emails and meetings seem to be the winner. And then we've got some fires and some other things. Great. Because 2 out of the 3 big ideas is related to emails and meetings. So seems like we're on the right track here. All right, I'm going to move on, but thank you for doing that. So I want to first get you in the mindset of what is your time worth? I know I was making some very big claims that you may or may not believe, but I can promise you that it's not very difficult to save a full business day a week. But just to set the bar even lower, what would even just an hour a week be worth to you? I want you to think for a second, what's your hourly rate worth? And what would an hour a week be worth to you? For example, if your time even on the low end is $50 an hour, right? What is that worth to you? It's probably 100 or 200 or 500. But whatever it is, I just want you to think about that. And if you multiply that by 50, that's how much you're saving in a year. I put together a bit of a grid for you just to make it a bit easier. But if you just assume that your team is $50 an hour with a 50-week work year, I've done the math for you. An hour a week is worth $25,000 a year for you if you're a team of 10. And obviously that grows with team size. And this is just straight profit. And it's not just about the time savings and the dollar value that brings to you. If you can be more efficient, if you can get an extra 20, 30, 40% out of every person that you hire, you can really reduce the need to hire more people. And then think about all the cost savings associated if you don't have to hire as many people. Think about the recruiting, the onboarding, the training, the salary. What are the odds that they stick around for a year? And probably the biggest cost savings by not having to hire as many people is you keep the complexity factor down. Have you ever thought that you needed to hire someone only to find that actually you're not saving any more time? We've all been there before where you think, oh, I just need to hire that social media person, or we just need to hire one more person to do this. The thing is, to get value out of that person, they need to be trained properly, but also every person you add to your organization adds exponential complexity to the organization. It actually, and I talk about this in the book, it follows a formula called Metcalfe's law, which comes from the field of networking. If you think about the value of a network, think about a cell phone. If you're the only person that owns a cell phone, it's not that valuable. Now, if 2 of you own a cell phone, at least you can call each other. As you add more cell phones to the network, there's exponentially more ways that you can make phone calls. It's the same with how you manage a team. Every person that you add to your organization, it's exponentially harder to keep people on the same page. So just to show you what that looks like, a 5-person team, there's 10 ways that information can get transferred. And now if you double that, you go to a 10-person team, it's 45. You could see how that already starts blowing up just at a team of 10, right? Imagine what that looks like when you're 100 or 1,000. And so that's why you might be wondering sometimes why work just didn't get any easier when you added a person. It's because of this phenomenon. And it's not just with operational, it's with everything. Like adding an extra person, it's harder to get them up to speed with your core values. It's harder for information to get transferred. Everything is harder. So if you can get an extra 20 to 40% out of everyone on your team, you can avoid the expense side of the hiring process, but you can also keep your team more simple and less complex for longer, which is a huge advantage and probably even worth more than the hard cost that we were talking about before. Not to mention with an extra hour or 5 hours or 10 hours, now people might have a bit of breathing room. They might be able to come up for air, no pun intended. And they might be able to go on vacation that you haven't been able to go on for a while. You might be able to go on vacation and actually unplug for a day or two because you have trusted systems in place to know that things aren't just going to, blow up while you're gone. So it's time savings, it's cost savings, but it's also a reduction of stress and an increase to culture, because now people can work on things that really tap into their unique ability, give them joy without all the chaos, unneeded chaos that's happening right now inside of teams. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into the 3 big ideas from the book. The first is that you want to optimize for retrieving information, not for transferring information. This is the underpinning concept throughout the book. If you take away one thing from the book and from today's talk, you want to have systems and processes in your team where you're optimizing for retrieving information, not transferring. What ends up happening inside of teams, and we've fallen into this, we've seen every team that we've ever worked with fall into this. When you're at full capacity and you're overwhelmed, what do? You start playing hot potato. It's just like you're working a 16-hour day. It's just like, here, Andy, just take it. It could be a text, an email, a Slack message, an Asana message, without any rhyme or reason. It's whatever was just convenient for you in the moment. So congratulations, you just saved 3 seconds. You played hot potato. The thing is, when everyone's playing hot potato and everyone's optimizing for whatever is fastest for them in that moment, everyone loses, right? Because now what ends up happening is, by saving that extra couple seconds just now, you might have just made your colleague waste 30 minutes looking for that in a month, right? And when everyone has some arbitrary random place that they go to where it's like, well, I was in text and that was a bit faster for me, or I was in email. You can't have any logical framework to know where to look for things. So you have to end up looking in 6 different places to go and find whatever the hell you need to find, right? I come from a math background. So in math, this is the difference between what we call a local optimization versus a global optimization. And the field that I am an expert in, that I'm passionate about, is how teams can be productive, not just individuals. There's tons of productivity books out there. You've Getting Things Done by David Allen, 4-Hour Work Week. But individual productivity is necessary but not sufficient for teams to be productive. It requires collaboration, coordination, and sometimes people have to sacrifice their own productivity for the greater good of the team. And that's really what I'm interested in. It's a much more complex but impactful field. So we got to get rid of this hot potato game. We have to align people on where information should go, and you have to align your team to take pause. Everyone makes a commitment to invest the extra 5 seconds, 10 seconds to put it in the right drawer. Because if everyone aligns and everyone makes a mutual agreement that they're going to all take that extra 5-10 seconds and put it in the right drawer, what goes around comes around. And now tomorrow or next week or next month, when you need to find something, you're saving all the time because your colleague spent the extra 5 seconds for you in the moment. Is this making sense?
Oh, yeah.
And this helps you to avoid what I call the scavenger hunt. Was that a text? Was that an email? Was that an Asana message? The thing that drives me crazy, one, it's wasting time looking for something that should be 1 or 2 clicks away. But 2, when you pay a lot of money to hire someone, they build some asset for you, a deck, a PDF, a video, whatever, and then you can't find it. And then they leave, and it was just you might as well have just burnt the money, right? So if you can avoid the scavenger hunt, you're going to save an extra 20 to 40% per person on your team. And we already think about this in our personal lives. I'll give you an example in a second, but this stuff, I'm not just making up the 20 to 40%. Asana comes out with a yearly report, and about half of people's time spent in business is what they call work about work. That's inefficiently looking for something that was misorganized. That was inefficiently using email and re-looking at the same message over and over. So if you can avoid all of this work about work that Asana calls it, think about how much extra time people can spend on those impactful projects that are really going to move the needle, right? If someone is spending 40 hours a week on email and scheduling and admin and scavenger hunt, and say 10 hours a week on high impact, high value projects and initiatives, even if you can save 10 hours a week for that person, which I'm saying even, but I mean, that's a pretty common result. That 10 hours, you're actually doubling the amount of time in that example from 10 hours to 20 hours that they can spend on high impact work. So it's actually, in some respects, that 10 hours in a lot of cases could actually be doubling their productivity, because you've just doubled the amount of time that they can actually spend on high value, impact focused work. And we already think about retrieval versus transfer in so many contexts of our personal lives. For example, the fastest way to finish your laundry is you just take it out of the dryer and you just throw it in a drawer. You just transfer it, just toss it, right? But you don't do that. You take pause and you spend an extra few seconds and you put your socks in one drawer and you put your underwear in another drawer. And it looks like this. And that you don't do that because it's the fastest way to be done with laundry, but you do that because tomorrow when you need to get an outfit together, it's much quicker. It's the same thinking in business. You've got different drawers for different types of information. And if you align your team on the different drawers that you guys use at your company, you're going to make everything far easier and faster for people to do their job. Okay. And so as it turns out, and this is the core of my book, there's 3 major drawers that every single team, every one of you on this call, you have these 3 drawers on your team. You've got a communication drawer. Okay. And then there's sub drawers to this, but you communicate with people. You've got team to communicate with. You've got clients, partners, vendors. You need to plan. You've got tasks and projects. Work needs to get done. And then you've got resources. You've got your SOPs, your processes. And so we all have these drawers with sub drawers, and you need to align your team on what tools you use for each of these drawers and align them on the best practices of how, but also when they should use each of these drawers. Think about it like this. Imagine you were to take your team on a camping trip in the forest. You're doing a team offsite, and due to the recession and budget cuts, you're not going to the Four Seasons, you're now doing a camping trip. Well, on this camping trip, you would need walkie-talkies to communicate. You would need a map to navigate out of the forest, and you'd probably want to have some type of manual with you to know what to do in case there's a bear, how to set up a tent, etc. So it's the same thing with your team. You need to communicate with people. Hey, Andy, welcome to the team. You need to plan. Hey, Emily, could you get me the recording of today's session by Friday, right? And then you have SOPs, and processes. Hey, every time you do a Petra event, you need to book a speaker, you need to confirm with the speaker, you need to set up a date, set up a Zoom, etc. We've all got communication, planning, and resources. It's so common, though, that people mix things up and they do things based off of personal preference, or they misuse tools and they're putting things in a communication tool that should be in a planning tool. So if you are texting, emailing, or sending a Slack or Microsoft Teams message to someone, and the communication looks something like, hey, blank, can you do this by blank? That shouldn't go in a communication tool. Things can get lost in there. That's the whole purpose of tools like Asana, Monday, ClickUp, etc. If you want to hold someone accountable and not have it slip through the cracks, that's a planning tool. Hey everyone, welcome Nick to the team. Hey, there's pizza in the water cooler channel. That's communication. Okay. A lot of times we mix that up, and it's just easier and quicker to do things in a communications tool. Nothing's faster than text. So if the argument that you have is, well, I like to email or text because it's faster, we're back to the whole retrieval versus transfer conversation. All right. Now, over the last decade, work has changed significantly. It doesn't matter if you're a small team of 10 or a large team of 100. It doesn't matter if you're a financial advisor or the world's top, coach. That framework is going to make work easier for you and your team. And if you don't start thinking about all these tools that I'm mentioning and align your team on best practices of when and how to use these tools, you can still get work done, just like you could still, use a typewriter and get by. But if all of your competitors have an M2 chip and you have a typewriter, you're probably gonna get squashed pretty quickly, right? And so if you're not taking advantage of all these new ways of working, you will fall behind, and it's not a nice to have, it's going to be a requirement if you want to stay competitive in your market. All right, let's get our phones back and do another quick interaction. So if you wouldn't mind scanning this, if you needed to onboard a new team member and you can't remember, that new step that you guys aligned on, where would you go to find it? I appreciate the honesty of the group. Sorry, Andy, were you saying something? All right. All right. Let me just stop sharing and talk for a second. Pretty interesting, huh? It's mostly communication tool, right? This is problem number one. You're using communication tools because it's faster for you in the moment. That's the whole transfer. It takes longer and it's more annoying on the front end to stop, take pause, and update a wiki. But long term, that's how you're going to save exponential time. So it seems like over half of about 40% are going to communication tools like Slack and Teams. But what's also interesting is how different people solve this problem in different ways. So it just goes to show you there's a lack of alignment kind of across all teams and businesses in how you solve common things, right? And that again is the purpose of my book. It's to give you a framework so everyone's thinking about this problem in the same way. Let's do another one. Last one. No more quizzes after this. If you wanted to know the status of a client project, where would you go? All right. Well, I don't know if this is the right answer. So I hope that this isn't based off of anything that you've learned so far yet today, but I do hope that you do take away learnings from today. But great. It is a Asana work management tool. About half of the group is using communication tools and other tools to solve this problem. But yes, in an ideal world, you'd look in your work management, project management tool to know the status of a project or anything to do with work. All right. Now, a very common piece of pushback is this really easier, Nick? We use text and email and we get along just fine. I feel like it'll be less efficient for me if we have to manage all these different tools. Isn't that less efficient if I have to look in a bunch of different places? That's a very common thing to think about if you're sitting here right now and you're wondering that. My reply to that is, look, for sure, you don't want to have thousands of tools, but everything that falls into CP&R is so foundational, so critical to the efficiency of your team that it's such a common practice. It's such a big part of how work is done that you want to use a tool built for purpose. Like similar to, taking you back to that camping in the forest example. If you had a Swiss Army knife, you could chop down a tree, but I don't know about you, but a chainsaw is going to do it much faster, right? So it's a very similar argument. You could do a lot with a Swiss Army knife, where text and email are the current Swiss Army knives in your team. But there are cases where you just want to have a chainsaw, even though it's an extra tool, because it's going to be so much faster. Okay. So within communication, you've got personal communication, text, WhatsApp, Voxer. You've got internal communication tools like Teams and Slack are the common ones. And then you've got external, which, you know, Outlook and Gmail are the two most common. Now, I am not saying that there is never a case for texting or calling or violating some of these things. I'm just giving you general guidelines. If your building is getting robbed, do whatever you want, like text, call, whatever. Like if there's an emergency, use judgment, right? Don't say like, sorry, why didn't you call me? Well, because in Nick's book, Come Up for Air, it said, you know, that, you know, we should only internally communicate. Like, so use your judgment. If there's something urgent, do what you need to do. But I'm giving general guidelines for the 99% of cases in the day-to-day, minute-to-minute of work, okay? Within planning, some of the most common ones today on the market are listed here. And then for resources, you've got Coda and Notion and Confluence, which are for your internal wikis, and you've got process documentation tools like Process Street. If you don't have any of these tools and you are interested, you could, I'm gonna give you my email at the end. We get discounts with all these services too, if you want a special code. The main thing to take away though from all this isn't so much what's the best tool. We all have our preferences. I try to be as tool agnostic as possible, but inevitably I have personal preference. I think that Asana is the best work management tool. I think Process Street, but even if these tools change, if competitors come up, if they go out of business, as long as I understand the purpose of these tools, like we could switch project management tool tomorrow and be up and running no time, because my team knows how to think about it. They know how to set it up, when to use it, how to use it. That's the most important. Okay. All right. So that was all big idea number one. The other two big ideas are much faster. So the first big idea is all about how you save time. This big idea is all about optimizing time, because time isn't linear. Not all time is worth the same. Your time might be worth, for easy math, $100 an hour. If you look on the left, that just shows every time slot in your calendar would be $100 an hour time slot. That's not how it works in real life. It's more like a heat map on the right. For example, Monday at 9 a.m. after a relaxing weekend, and you worked out and you meditated and you did your journaling and you drink your kombucha, whatever you do, your time might be worth $500 an hour at 9 a.m. on a Monday because your brain is at full horsepower. Compare that to 7 o'clock on a Friday when you've had 100 Zooms for the week and you're exhausted and you're in the back of an Uber and you don't have your computer with you. Your time isn't worth the same. Maybe that's worth $20 an hour. And so if you can start thinking about predicting your energy levels and the value of your time at different slots, and you start optimizing your calendar around that, you're going to be at a huge advantage. Now, meetings is one of the biggest costs inside of companies. It was estimated that last year there was $38 billion of productivity loss due to inefficient meetings. And the funny thing is a lot of the meetings were about how to make meetings more productive. But there's a few things that you can be thinking about with every meeting. Does it need to be as long as it is? Is there a way that you can cut down on the length of time? It's very often that you kind of fill whatever you're given. So if it's a 45-minute meeting versus an hour, you'll figure out a way to get it all covered. Does it need as many people? Think about every meeting that you have with your team. Think about the cost. Each of you have an hourly rate, times that by the length of time, and you add it up. A lot of these meetings is one of the biggest costs in companies. So if you could reduce the length, reduce the people, reduce the frequency, instead of it being weekly, maybe it could be monthly or biweekly, you're gonna start seeing immediate time savings. And then also have an agenda. No agenda, no attenda is a pretty good phrase. So have an agenda, audit the meetings, and try to shift as much as possible to asynchronous. If you're on a meeting and someone is just sharing their screen, showing you slides of a report that's non-collaborative, that didn't need to be a live meeting. It didn't need to be at that $500 an hour time slot. Yeah? You could cut down, if that's a 15-minute part of the time, tell them, great, record a Loom video. Loom is another tool, or any screen recording. Record it, send it to me, and now when I'm in the back of an Uber doing nothing, I'll fill that time by watching that video, or when you're on a walk or whatever you're doing. And so if you can time shift and reduce the length of meetings by acknowledging what part of that meeting could be asynchronous, having people record video or even writing it out, and now on your own time, when the time isn't as valuable, you cover that part, you're going to start freeing up not just time, but time at the highest value time slots on your calendar. Making sense? Doesn't require any fancy technology to do this one. Okay. The last thing, the third big idea, is optimize your inbox. Now, I've rattled off a lot of tools on today's talk. Don't be overwhelmed. You should do one thing at a time. The number one thing that we help businesses with, as silly as it sounds, is we teach people how to use email properly. And it sounds silly because you've been using it for decades, but I promise you, you have been using it wrong. Email is one of the quickest ways to save 3 to 5 hours a week per person. And not to mention, it's not just about time savings, it's about not missing an important email that could be worth tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. When you don't have a good framework for how to use your email, you're wasting time and things get missed. And sometimes those misses can be extremely costly. Every single client that we've ever worked with, we've had to stop and give them 5 minutes because there was an email from 3 weeks ago that they didn't realize it was there that was worth tens of thousands of dollars. Every single time that happens. We talk about this in the book too, but we have a system called RAD for how to deal with email. Every email, you either reply, archive, or defer. And depending if you use Outlook or Gmail, there's some nuanced differences, but the theory and the thinking is the same. But you want to have your settings right. You want to be utilizing things like the snooze button, which most people don't do. Oops. Right? That's the defer part of RAD. And most people think they're at inbox zero, but it's unread zero, and it's a completely different thing. And unread zero doesn't count. Your eye is still processing and looking at crap that it shouldn't be looking at. Zero is this. Zero is you literally don't have any read or unread in your email. This is going to be probably one of the biggest gifts you can give yourself in terms of stress reduction and productivity gain. And it literally only what else can you invest 2 or 3 hours learning that for the rest of your life will save you 3 hours, 5 hours a week for the rest of your life? It's one of the biggest impacts that I can't stress enough. Every single person should be at inbox zero on your team. So in terms of wrap up here, you want to optimize for retrieval, not transfer. You want to not just save time, you want to optimize your time, and you want to be optimizing your inbox. And you need this now because there's money on the table and unnecessary stress inside of your team. Burnout is skyrocketing. So if you can limit the burnout and increase the productivity, it's a win. I've talked a lot about I've referenced my book a lot. My book is 320 pages long. HarperCollins did not want it to be a single page longer. And so what we did is throughout the book for advanced materials, we say, look, if you want the quiz, if you want the playbook, if you want this, go to comeupforair.com, and we've got a bunch of additional bonus content there. You can imagine I'm a productivity person. So if I weren't, this book would have probably been 1,400 pages for most people. It's a dense book. It's not one of these fluffy books where you could summarize it in 3 pages, but yet it still was a pretty long book. So there's a lot of bonus content on that site. And I'll end with this, but I want you to picture a day where your team comes to you and says that they're doing the best work of their life, where it's easier, less stressful, everything is getting done, and your business is just growing like crazy without the burnout, and you're loving every minute of your life. And so it doesn't matter if you're a 1, 10, 100 person team, this framework is going to be helpful and help save you and your team a lot of time. And it's going to feel like, you ever go driving and it's just like all green lights and there's no speed bumps, there's no friction, you could just go. Work can be easier where there's less stress and more fun. And work can be easier where your team is coming to you happy without burnout, and you know exactly what's getting done. So go to that website I showed you, and together let's make work easier. And if you'd like to stay in touch, this is my personal email. And again, that URL that I was talking about. And I think that was exactly the 40 minutes, right? So I think we got 5 minutes for Q&A.
Yep, that's correct. So if you have any questions for Nick, go ahead and put your question in the chat and we can ask it to him. Thank you, Nick. That was really great.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So you asked a question about what tools people are using to manage projects earlier. To be fair, most of the people on the screen are work with or owners of companies that we end up coaching. And we have a software tool called Align that allows them to do exactly. So that was the representation most likely on that screen, is people are using some tools in that regard already. So we jumped one hurdle. I think the content is highly relevant to everyone, highly important to focus on, does take discipline. To your point, it's really easy for me even to just go, all right, well, rather than assigning a task inside of a system, I'm just going to send an email and ask for something. And then for the other person to respond in a way that takes away their time too. So keeping that in mind. Anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Nick?
Yeah, Eric Brown in Atlanta, Georgia. How to teach and enforce the RAD email system?
There's a few different ways, and it matters how important it is to you and how much you want to invest. So one, you can learn it and try to teach everyone. Two, you could get the book and have people read the book. And if, those two things, if you want to move faster and not deal with that stuff, at my company Leverage, our core business is doing trainings, but the book can get you pretty far too. So I would read the book. And if you need further help beyond the book, we've got 30-day training programs for all these different tools, and emails, probably the most popular one.
Thanks, Nick.
All right. Any other questions for Nick? Surely there's a question about zero inbox somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know if I can
Go ahead.
ask. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Yep.
you can.
Yep. Okay. So it all makes sense. I think what's overwhelming to me and maybe to others is that we already have information that's all over the place. And so do we tackle that first? Do we look at starting going forward? I think that's what's really just bouncing around in my brain right now is where do you start?
Where do you start?
So the great question. I can tell you two things. One, every company is unique, and where you should start is dependent on where you're at. But I can also tell you that most companies should start with email. If you're drowning in work, which most of us are, I'm guessing that, Kathy, is that your name? I'm guessing, Kathy, that you're pretty busy. I'm guessing that at the end of the week, you didn't look back and say like, oh, I wasted 5 hours or 10 hours. Like, I'm guessing your days are pretty packed and full and you're at full capacity. Is that fair? Yeah. So when you're at full capacity or drowning in work, which is why I called my book Come Up for Air, because the most common thing people say is they're drowning in work. The very first thing you need to think about is, how do I create some extra breathing room and capacity? Because in order to make any type of change, you need to have a little bit of breathing room and space to make that change. So whatever's going to be the biggest bang for your buck impact to give you that breathing room is what I would suggest you start with. And usually, in general, email is not a new tool. Email is something that you're already using. So it's much easier to optimize a current tool than to roll out a new tool. And two, it's not rocket science. In literally in the matter of hours, we're able to get people to zero and teach them how to keep it. And that gives people enough breathing room to then go to the next thing, whether that's improving how projects are managed or optimizing a process or whatever else is broken. But another way to look at it is you have a sink that's overflowing with water because you have a broken pipe. And right now you're mopping faster because it's a bit quicker to just mop it up and move on to the next thing. But unless you go in at some point, patch the pipe, for the rest of history, you're just going to be mopping. And at some point, even if patching the pipe takes 5 hours and it only takes you, 30 minutes to mop, after 10 mops, you might as well have just invested the time to fix the pipe, right? Because now every time you mop was a wasted 30 minutes after that. So that's my long-winded answer, but saying I would
that's
most
super
likely start
helpful.
working with.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I love your analogies, but that's helpful to at least put some structure around it. Thank you.
Great.
All right, I think we've got time for one more. Soledad, if you want to come off mute and ask your question.
So I wanted to see what you thought of this. So I was kind of following down the drowning email thing, and I actually would have it in the corner, and I'd be working on a big project, and I'd see there was another one, and every time I would do that, it would take my attention away from the project that I needed to get done. So a few weeks ago, I thought, you know what, I'm not even going to open my email, and I actually put on my calendar email block, where for 15 minutes, 3 times a day, that's all I do is check these emails, reply back. Like you said, if I can archive them, archive it. But if I can't, then I put it on maybe the next day's focus block that I'm working on, that I'm going to tackle that as a project and flag it. Tell me what's wrong with that. What's right with that? What are your thoughts on that? Helpful, hurtful? Am I wasting more time?
No, I think, batching is a productivity principle. So you're just talking about batching. And I talk about in the book how you don't want to be checking email every single second. You don't want notifications turned on all these tools. So every time someone sends a message, you're distracted. There's other books out there like Deep Work by Cal Newport, or my friend Nirey all wrote Indistractable. Every time you're in a flow state and you're taken out of a flow state, it takes like 15 minutes to get back into a flow state. So but it all comes back to, alignment with your team and mutual expectations. There's a lot of cultures where they expect immediate response, which there's very few industries where you need immediate response.
Agreed.
For the most part, we're not in the middle of open heart surgery or like on a battlefield. Like most of the time it can wait, X number of hours. So I definitely agree with the principle of batching and having for the most part, notifications turned off so you can do that deep work. There's a chapter in the book where I talk about sprint planning, and what we cover in that chapter is, if you think about what you can accomplish in a week, I know that I'm over, so I'll finish with this. If you think about what your actual capacity is to do these projects that you're talking about, say your target is 50 hours a week to work, just making up a number, 40 hours, let's use 40. You don't actually have 40 hours a week to do projects. You've got 40 minus whatever you've already committed to in the calendar for meetings. So how many hours a week do you have meetings in general?
I'd say 8 to 10 at least.
All right, so let's say 10.
Yeah.
Let's say 10 hours in meetings. How much time did you spend on email and replying to messages and, inbox zero, let's call that?
An hour a day at least.
Okay. Plus, do you use other tools like Slack or Asana or Line or any of these other tools?
Yes.
All right. So how much time do you spend on all those other tools?
Probably 30 minutes a day. 30 minutes to an hour a day. So I would say an hour overall.
All right. So let's just bucket that as admin. So you got 2 hours a day of admin between email and those tools. And then so that adds up to 10. And then you've got another 10 hours a week, you said, in meetings. So out of your 40-hour week, you've already got 20 hours committed in other stuff. So when you're trying to figure out what can you accomplish this week for new projects and new initiatives, you're only playing with 20 hours of chips. You're not playing with the 40 in that example. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just kind of wanted to get your take on it. Like, how do we play with more?
Well, you have to make sure that you're using each of these tools properly, that you're not wasting time. And, tricks like batching, turning off notifications are great personal productivity tips that, I'd recommend you do.
And then the sprint planning chapter.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
And Nick, isn't it true that there will be stuff that just doesn't get done?
Yeah. For everything that you say yes to, you're saying no to an infinite number of other things. right? Anything that you do right now, you could be doing an infinite number of other things. So it's impossible to do everything, but what you want is you want to have systems that you can clearly prioritize so that it's not, you don't want to not do something because it slipped through the cracks and you didn't have control over it. You want to prioritize what's important and knowingly decide and take control over that decision and say, hey, I know I'm not going to do this because this is more important. That is totally cool and what should happen. What you don't want is this didn't happen because I'm disorganized and actually it should have happened, but it slipped through the cracks. That's what you need to avoid.
All right, Em, is there anything else?
We do have one more question. I don't know if we have time, but Nick, they can follow up with you via your email as well.
Yeah, I gave my email. I gave my book website, my personal website. I just launched a podcast too, the Optimized Podcast. If you're interested in
Oh, cool.
this type of stuff, that's another place that you could go. We're doing live consultations, and anyone here, feel free to apply to be on it. I'm co-hosting it with a guy named Jay Abraham, if you've ever heard of Jay.
Oh,
And so we usually we're going to be charging $20,000 for the 90-minute consultations. And right now it's free while we're launching it. And so if you go to the optimizedpodcast.com, check out the episodes are really interesting and very impactful. So that's another place to look if you're interested in this stuff.
Very cool. As I said earlier, very relevant, very on point. The book is amazing. Grab a copy. We'll put